Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone who made it possible for me to be here, to put this event together. You know, we were talking about it for a number of months. Omicron, took us out, and there was a question, should we do it virtually or not? And it felt like we should wait to do it in person, and I think everything that's happened so far here today is just reaffirming the fact that we were right to wait, we were right to do it in person. I'm honored to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with all of you about all of these critical issues. I mean, there's so many things to say, but I just want to speak to this because people, they say, I'm in the media allegedly, I'm allegedly a journalist, and you see the massive amount of distortions. And the question was raised about, Eritrea and the Western mind. And I think it's a perfect example of how so many things are distorted in terms of our reality. Eritrea has a higher than the sub-Saharan African average for life expectancy, rural electrification, infant mortality, literacy, and several other characters. But all you hear is, well, Eritrea is so terrible and people are leaving the country. And all those topics I just mentioned, life expectancy, infant mortality, literacy, rural electrification, Eritrea is doing better than Nigeria, one of the richest countries on earth. Half of Lagos is living in Johannesburg, and no one has anything to say other than the US government going over there and saying this is the best government of all of Africa, even though it's also the most corrupt. So, you have to ask yourself the way that our minds are so warped around almost every issue in Africa. I mean, we saw it when we landed in Addis. We were there right when they were saying that the TPLF is whatever, like 10 feet outside of the city limits. And, you're getting the text messages from the US Embassy, leave now, make your preparations. One thing that might be interesting to you, if you're an American in a country when they call for an evacuation, they won't pay for your ticket, but they will loan you the money at a really high interest rate. And so they're like texting you to sign up for this loan program in case they need to loan you the money to fly you out of the country. So, I mean, it was relatively obvious that this probably wasn't true when we were flying in there. But, you never know, there's things happening. Maybe it's a little bit of truth, a little bit of falsehood. And I just was, even being there for 5 hours, let's say, in Addis, I saw fewer police officers than I see in like 5 minutes in New York City. And I just thought to myself, well, if there is allegedly a war about people should be filling sandbags, running from place to place, and everybody is, going about their daily life. But we went to Friendship Park, beautiful park, new park there in Addis near the Prime Minister's office. And it was like the graduation day, I guess, for high schools. And so, people were out there doing their graduation thing and taking photos in the cap and gown. There was like 3 or 4. I don't really know. I wish I was a photographer. The wedding photography industry in Ethiopia is like big. But, people are out there doing their thing. It's a whole lot. And it was so night and day from what you were hearing that even just knowing that it wasn't true going in couldn't really fully tell the whole story of what was going on. And I think that was why it was so important for us at Breakthrough News to go, to be in Ethiopia, to be in Eritrea, even though it was a limited amount of time. Not so much that we felt that we were going to find something so new that no one has ever heard of or no one has ever said or whatever it may be, but that there really is no substitute for going to a place and seeing it for yourself and seeing it on the ground and having the opportunity to hear from people. And I think also to understand the depth of the tragedy, really, the whole Horn is going through. I mean, you meet a lot of younger people in both countries where we were in, and the level of hopefulness that people had about the possibilities of a peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea and what that could mean for their future. And I'm talking people who are like 27 and younger, many people younger than that, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, who are, looking at the next 80 years, what it's going to be. And the feeling that something new is in the air. There's a lot of questions, a lot of discussions, a lot of disagreements, a lot of things that still need to be determined. But you just had a feeling that everything in that sense was up for grabs. Which under the TPLF, everything was locked down, closed down, no discussion, this is what it is. And now you have this whole period of discussion. I mean, to go to, the History Museum that they have put, here in Addis with some of the old imperial areas, they put a museum in there, to see all the families with young kids, bringing their young kids, having conversations about their history, their culture. What I view is perhaps one of the most historic cultural dialogues on earth right now between Eritreans and Ethiopians. I mean, these are huge events, and they pretend so much, And you can see that people have so much hope, but also so much fear that it can be so easily derailed. And that the possibility of something like the TPLF doing this uprising could even happen, and to see the globe in the so-called international community take the most unbelievable of positions. I mean, that's honestly how we even got involved in Breakthrough News. Some of you know our good friend and comrade Simon Tesfamariam, and I was on the phone with him, and he was just asking me, what I was covering. And anyway, in the course of the conversation, he starts telling me, well, they're talking about, well, TPLF are the heroes, they're saying on the news. And I just thought, what? How is this even possible? I mean, their record of destruction is so well known. I mean, they were so terrible, their own people pushed them out. I mean, you've got to be pretty bad if the coalition that you handpicked to back you is like, nah, you gotta go. Like, that gives you a level of how alienated and how isolated they have become inside all elements and parts of the country. And, we had struggled against what was happening in Somalia with the Answer Coalition. We knew what they were doing. We knew the hand-in-glove reality with imperialism. And it was just, maybe I shouldn't have been shocked. Maybe I should have been more cynical. I don't know. But I was shocked that it was such a one-sided presentation. And so we knew we had to do something. I mean, we have a limited amount of money, resources, people, followers, or whatever. But we knew we had to lean into the discussion because this could only be bad. That was one thing I knew. Whatever else you may say, if you're telling me the TPLF is trying to come back in power in any way, shape, or form, much less through a war, you knew it had to be terrible. It had to be bad. It was certainly not for the good of the people of Ethiopia, and not for the good of the people of Tigray. And I'll just mention, by the way, when we were there in Addis, we had left when we were actually in Puryear when this happened, but 5,000 Tigrayans protested in the streets of Addis Ababa against the TPLF. Now, people can say whatever they want, it's a minority of a minority, but this is also at the same time where there was a lot of tension in Addis around the sleeper cell issue, and many Tigrayans were arrested, and there was a lot of suspicion. So the bravery of thousands of people to come out and to demonstrate, I think, was huge. And I think those voices deserve to be lifted up, and I think it's very critically important. And Nebi, you already spoke to this, but I think we do have to continue to say it, that the people of Tigray not only are victims of the TPLF, but that Tigrayan people all around the world are speaking out against the TPLF, and their voices are consistently silenced and consistently downgraded. And I think that's not only deeply problematic, but deeply immoral. The other thing I'll say, and what I think is important in terms of how we frame this conflict, is, everything in Africa is marginalized and regionalized as like something happening over there. I mean, the dark continent mentality of Africa is still the majority mentality in the West, especially, certainly in the media. And I think it's important for us to really insist that the conflict in the Horn, and it's about the region of the Horn of Africa, but it's not a regional conflict. It's actually a conflict of extreme importance to the entire international order. I mean, this is why the United States was willing to, invest so much of its own reputation behind what was obviously one of the, most malign forces on the planet, because it's critically important to maintain a stranglehold on the region. And, you don't really have to look far. You just have to read their own documents. I mean, the U.S. puts out a national defense strategy every few years, every 4 years or so. And the goal of it is the unclassified version to give some sense of what, to even call it a defense strategy in and of itself is a little ridiculous. War strategy is maybe the better way to put it. But to more or less lay out their goals. And they lay them out quite openly, that their goal is to maintain control over the entire world. To have a rules-based international order where the United States makes all the rules, and to make sure that anyone who steps out of line with those rules, they call them revisionist powers, is punished, is isolated, is sanctioned, is invaded, is overthrown. That's the way it works. And in the most recent one from 2018, and I should note they're going to release a new doc this year at some point, so look for that. But the most recent one from 2018, it says specifically that the biggest challenge for America in the 21st century is the rise or the return of great power competition between the United States and Russia and China. And because now there are, I'm paraphrasing slightly now, but you can read it for yourself and see I'm not making this up. And so because there are now essentially more options for different nations all around the world than just the United States and just Europe, and to some degree they can actually leverage these other countries against the United States and Europe, the most important thing is to maintain, as they say, favorable regional balances of power. So in all of the critical geostrategic regions, you can see that the United States is engaged in major military, economic, and diplomatic efforts to isolate anyone who could potentially be counter-hegemonic. And I think it's important to understand that because it's not presented correctly. You do not have to be hostile to the United States. And we should say, in the Horn, people are not hostile to the United States. And in fact, people would like to have some level of economic, cultural intercourse, but they just don't want to be dictated to on how the terms are going to work. But it doesn't actually matter if you say, hey, I would love to trade with you. I would love to have, you have a huge Horn of Africa diaspora here in the United States. I mean, it should be natural for there to be, all sorts of people-to-people contacts happening on a regular basis and being consistently deepened. None of that actually matters if the people in charge in the country say, well, in all circumstances, our interests may not coincide with the U.S. interests. I mean, I'll give you an example. There are some people who say that Prime Minister Abiy is a neoliberal, IMF-instigated person that is trying to destroy the Ethiopian economy and hand it over to capitalists. Now, there's a whole other discourse around that. But the thing that's always laid out is, well, they're going to privatize the telephone industry. They're going to privatize the telecom industry and broadband. And, even that is a little bit of a misnomer. They aren't privatizing the main company, but they are offering 2 new licenses. But look at the way it played out. Now, for the United States, you saw what they did with Huawei, right? They did everything possible to destroy Huawei because it was a powerful, rising technology company all around the world doing a lot in Africa. So obviously, they want to make sure that US companies, and to a lesser degree Swedish companies, Ericsson and others, have the pole position all around the world on 5G and all these different things. So when Ethiopia decides to issue 2 new licenses for broadband spectrum, cell phone spectrum, and so on and so forth, the first one goes to Safaricom. Now, Safaricom is a Kenyan company, but it's actually owned by a South African company, so it's an African company, but they have a huge partnership with Huawei. The third license, the second new one, there's sort of be 3 cell phone companies and internet providers in Ethiopia. It ended up not working out, but it went to MTN, it's another South African company. Also a huge business with Huawei. So even in the context of capitalism, which the US says it supports, the deepening and the opening of new sectors to capitalism in this piece in Ethiopia didn't benefit the United States and Europe, it benefited Africa and China. And that's dangerous. It doesn't matter what they claim to believe when they're talking in Washington, D.C. Because at the end of the day, they want AT&T to be over there. And if you bring in Safaricom instead of AT&T, you are a problem. And I think that's important for us to recognize because in our current world today, there are a lot of different visions and ideologies and thought processes that are existing of people who want to do something different than the US consensus. Some people are socialists, some people are capitalists, some people call themselves Pan-Africanists, some don't have any ideology, some are claiming a religious ideology, whatever it may be. And there are vast differences between all these different countries and political programs and backgrounds, and that's fine. But the one thing they have in common, I mean, what does Iran, Ethiopia, Eritrea, China, Vietnam, Venezuela, Cuba, what's the one thing they have in common is they just say, we want to do our own thing and not have the US tell us what to do day in, day out. And that's why they're on the same list. And you also have to look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in a massive way here. I'm sure some people who remember the creation of OPEC in 1973. Now, of course, now the U.S. and all these, monarchies in the Middle East are like this. So people might not forget it. When OPEC first was created, the U.S. was apoplectic. They did not want OPEC. The so-called Arab oil embargo created a huge crisis for U.S. imperialism because the price of gas went up because these countries were saying, like, okay, you need our oil, so we're going to come together and we're going to dictate the terms to you in which the oil comes. Now, many things happened and the U.S. was able to sort of turn that around in their favor. But I think you have to look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in that same context of the fear of a rising green energy power that is outside of the hegemonic dictates of the West. Because when you look at what I think will be the 7th largest hydropower project on the planet, so this is huge, that could drive development sustainably with no emissions, not just in Ethiopia, not just in Eritrea, not just Djibouti, not just Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Central African Republic maybe, Kenya even, and I mean all of these countries, this has been talked about, this is part of the diplomatic negotiations between them. How are they going to bring together their different electrical grids and so on and so forth. So that's a huge amount of power, especially in the context of carbon markets, right? Because now in Europe especially, but also in California and other places, you can essentially get a tax break for producing things in places that they're doing it with green energy. Which means that the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has the ability to turn the Nile River basin into one of the most strategic hubs for production on Earth. And it gives them a huge amount of leverage over Western corporations and Western governments and others who want to address the issue of sustainability to be able to use that not in a malign way, but to say, okay, well, we have the resources, so we have to make some of the rules. And if you don't like it, too bad. Now, I want to save the planet, so I'm more than happy for Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, and Uganda to make the rules if we get more clean energy. But obviously, the United States does not want that under any circumstance, and they certainly don't want Western corporations to be then at the dictates of Africans. I mean, this is still a very racist world, and the idea that Africans could be telling white people how to run their own business is deeply problematic. I mean, many of us have been on the continent. They don't want Africans to talk about their own business in Africa. Right. White people are over there running everything. Right. I mean, it's unbelievable. People who couldn't even, and I appreciate you, brother, what you said, but it's true. People who probably have no job prospects in America can go to Kenya and live like a king, working for some NGO and determining how they're going to live their whole life, using the women as their sex slaves, and then taking the money and deporting it somewhere else. There's a sister in Somalia doing an amazing thing on Twitter right now where she's revealing all these people who are making all this money. There was a guy doing like a pirate tour where they were like taking people out on boats and giving them guns. And I don't know what they were shooting at, but I guess allegedly it was supposed to simulate like you're fighting against the pirates, but this is like real people in a real country in Somalia. It's not a Disney World game, it's not a video game. And this cat is just over there, just getting paid. And the UN airport terminal, that's where all the international people come through when you go to Mogadishu. There's no sovereignty of the Somalian government in the airport. So just you can take whatever you want out, bring whatever you want in, and there's just nothing there. And it's been a big issue in the past few weeks. So I say that just to say that I think we do really have to insist to reiterate that this is not a regional conflict, even if it's about the region. It's an international conflict, and it's about the fact that U.S. imperialism is scared to death that they're just stranglehold on the rest of the world is slipping, and more people are waking up, and more people are willing to stand up and be counted and sacrifice to say, no more. We're going to move forward, and we're going to do it in a different way, regardless of what the circumstances are. One other piece I do just want to mention that I think is also relevant to this before I quickly move on, but an important issue I think as we consider development politics in the African continent, and that's food sovereignty. And I think that's very crucial to both Ethiopia and Eritrea. Thomas Sankara, the late revolutionary who was assassinated, of course, in Burkina Faso, and the trial of his assassins is ongoing right now, and we hope that they will be brought to power. But I have to say, some of this coup business in Burkina Faso, it might be manipulated to stop that trial. So we have to watch that very carefully. But, he has a famous quote where he says, people always ask me when I talk about imperialism, well, where is it? Where is imperialism? And I always say it's the food aid in front of you on your own plate. And that's one of the truest quotes I've ever heard. If you can't feed yourself, you are deeply at the mercy of other nations. And if the food is coming, you can look at a country like Venezuela, a country that's trying to emerge from deep imperialism. But because for so many years it was ruled by these compradors who prefer to live in Miami, they imported all the food from the United States. So as soon as they said that they're going to get more sovereign, the United States dropped sanctions on them, and they can't import the food from the United States. So then they have to go into a crash program to start growing their own food and to be traveling all around the world, trying to find places to get food at super inflated prices just to be able to feed people. So you can see it, because it's honestly one of the biggest challenges they have in their ability to maintain their sovereignty. And obviously, and it can be said many times, this is a discourse in Eritrea that when you're there, you hear all the time. And certainly that you can see everywhere you go, they're trying to grow something everywhere. It's just one of those things that it's just like, people over there are hungry. People are hungry in America. But you really, at a certain point, And who knows, maybe I'm just an idiot and I don't know what's going on. But when I go around the country for 5 days and I'm all over the place and every little plot of land they're trying to grow some food, it doesn't seem like they're trying to starve people. But it does seem like they're trying to make sure that they grow their own food so that they can't be, beholden to USAID saying, well, we're going to lock up the warehouse and then no one has any wheat and no one has any corn. And that's not going to happen there. And that's why they can do what they want. I mean, you look at WikiLeaks, and I want to also offer some praise to Julian Assange, who of course is being held in the Belmarsh prison and unbelievable trumped up charges right now. Because if you read WikiLeaks, it speaks very much to this issue because, what is the demonization of Eritrea in the State Department cables? That Eritrea was unwilling to participate in the dismemberment of Somalia. That Eritrea was unwilling to participate in the isolation of Iran. That Eritrea was reaching out to Venezuela and to Cuba, our quote-unquote enemies, as opposed to towing the line on all of these various different issues. So you can have, and at the same time, by the way, Eritrea, good relations with Iran, good relations with Saudi Arabia. So you can have relations with all sorts of people. You can have good conversations. When you can support your own people, at least to some degree, you have a lot more options. And so if you look at what's happening in Ethiopia now, I think the most underrated discourse, by far the most underrated discourse, is the strong push towards food sovereignty. And we were able to go to the south. We have our brother here from Hawassa. We were there in the south in Hawassa and Oromia, looking at the cooperative farms. Things that, again, you're never hearing anything about this. I mean, they're trying to get millions of farmers to start cooperatives of 50 to 200 people. And we were able to meet with some of these people, real cooperatives. They're voting on who their leadership is. They're talking about what their development priorities are going to be. They're using these cooperatives to get agricultural extension services so they can start growing more food than they've ever grown before, getting away from, the old age subsistence farming. People using, sticks to irrigate because they don't even have access to draft animals and plows, and putting people in a position to, double and triple their yields. I think this year is the first year that Ethiopia will be totally sovereign in wheat. And, there's other things coming. We weren't able to bring them back because you can't bring fruit from America, but we were given like 85 giant mangoes. Just truly rich soil there. And you can see very, very viscerally all across the country that it's extraordinarily fertile. And the possibility of food sovereignty in Ethiopia, I think, is another underrated issue, majorly underrated issue, and why the United States has been threatened by what's going on there. Because again, if you can feed your own people, and quite frankly, most of the Middle East, it gives you quite a bit of power, which is important. So I just wanted to say that quickly, kind of as an aside. But, to swing back to the United States, I think we're in an interesting moment, and we're in an interesting moment for those of us who have been saying no more, because I think it's relatively clear that the broader TPLF strategy has more or less failed. And essentially they've now devolved into just launching brutal massacres in different ways. This so-called Oromo Liberation Army that's slandering the name of the Oromo people, just going around massacring people, claiming to be a liberation army. I never even heard of a liberation army, just goes around and massacres civilians. And then now all of a sudden the State Department seems to care about these kind of things. But you can see when you're in that kind of situation, I don't think they have the military capability to do what they said they were going to do. And it's turning into just a terrible situation in Afar and Amhara. I mean, the things that we heard, the things that people told us, you can see them on Breakthrough News. I won't go through all of them, but honestly, it's just terrible atrocities. And most of these atrocities, by the way, that we're hearing from people are like on the way out. Like they're trying to settle scores with people. We were in Gashina, and we were asking them, what is the who are they targeting, and why are they targeting people? And the fighting was kind of very back and forth, and so it wasn't really like in the towns, right? So a lot of times the towns would sort of go from different forms of control to others because people pass through them. And so, they had their little informants and their little spotters, and it would be like if you gave food or water to Ethiopian government forces, then when they would come back, they would just kill you. Or it's like they were getting pushed out of the town, and someone was considered to be a collaborator, and they would just shoot you. So a lot of it wasn't even in the context of anything other than them just being like, okay, we're on the way out, and we're going to cause as much destruction as we possibly can. They're trashing all the hospitals, they're trashing critical infrastructure for no reason at all other than to just make it difficult for people to come back and to survive. So the United States, in many ways, is trying to adjust. I think it's important we don't be fooled by their adjustment, because there's sort of a rhetorical shift, a slight rhetorical shift in what you hear from the State Department. And all of a sudden, it's bad that the TPLF is doing these things. They couldn't say anything for 2 whole years, and then now they want to put out a press release saying, oh, well, this is terrible that there were these atrocities. Amnesty International, nothing to say for 2 whole years. Now they're putting out reports left and right. You've got these so-called former diplomats, people like Herman Cohen and these other people all over Twitter talking about, we need to have better relations with Eritrea, TPLF needs to disband, and we need to do this and do all that. This is all information warfare to confuse you. Because they want people to think that, okay, we get it, it was a mistake. That's what they want you to think. Okay, we get it, it was a mistake, we shouldn't have been there, we messed up, but now we're getting with the program, and we're trying to work with everybody, as they, said, after they said the high-level trip to Dr. Abiy, then they came out and said, well, no, we too support a democratic, non-ethnic Ethiopia with everyone living in harmony. And I just thought, since when? If anything, the U.S. is most associated with ethnic division more than anything else in the Horn, and not just in Ethiopia, and every other country. That's their main go-to. But honestly, when you look at the core of what they're saying, it really isn't very different. Because the core of what they're talking about right now is, a ceasefire, for whatever that means, basically at the current situation. They're not calling for the TPLF to disband. They're not calling for them to disarm. They're not even threatening to sanction them. The issue of sanctioning the TPLF that you brought up is so huge. How did they have a press conference in Washington, D.C. talking about they're going to overthrow a government? I believe the TPLF is actually listed under some Homeland Security designation as a terrorist. And you're just in the National Press Club holding press conferences? Imagine if the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine decided that they were going to have a press conference in the National Press Club about the struggle against Zionist apartheid. They would be in jail tomorrow. They would be today. They would have flown them, they would have bundled them up in their home at night and flown them over there to Israel and put them under the jail. So I'm just thinking, what is even going on here? But the key to it is the core of the U.S. agenda is to find some way, shape, or form to get the TPLF back in the mix. Now, they thought they were going to be able to do it by promoting and backing the war, and that because they would have to have some sort of peace negotiations in the war, that they would then be able to come up with some view where the TPLF would be in there. But obviously, the TPLF positions were so outrageous, there was no possibility for peace talks. I think that's important. There was a unilateral ceasefire declared by Ethiopia, and then Eritrea forces were attacked, and the TPLF then launches an invasion into Amhara and Afar and says we're going to march on Asmara and we're going to overthrow the Eritrean government. So they escalate the war massively, displace millions of people from their homes, start killing tens of thousands of people after the unilateral ceasefire that the international community demanded that Ethiopia do, and there's no condemnation of the TPLF. But obviously that failed for many different reasons, and I think we also have to say it failed because honestly a lot of average everyday people just left their job and left their home and got a gun and started fighting. Obviously, I think that the Ethiopian forces have done a lot. The Eritrean forces have also done a lot. Obviously, the special forces have done a lot. But, a lot of these militias, I know that people malign a lot of them. Maybe everyone doesn't have the right motivations. I can't speak to that, but what I can say is, you see a lot of people who are just shopkeepers, mechanics, farmers, whoever, who knew what the TPLF was, they lived under it, and were like, nah, we're not going to deal with that. So it failed because of this massive mobilization of people of the Horn against the TPLF, which I think is important to recognize the grassroots nature of some of that. But I say all that to say, so they're now just shifting to a different modality. They're shifting to a modality that is designed to trick you rhetorically into the idea that the United States is doing something right, principally because they want the No More movement not to get back into the streets. Because they don't want any point of counter pressure to expose what they're really doing and what they're really talking about, because they want people in Ethiopia to either A, feel like, yes, the U.S. is changing, because if not, why would people in the U.S. not be protesting? Or B, to feel more isolated, that everyone's forgotten about us and we better find some other way to make some sort of deal. But at the end of the day, the whole basis of it, the basis of the HR 6600 is, the same sanctions type reality. You look at the issue of AGOA, and listen, you might argue that Ethiopia would be better off without AGOA, because the whole nature of AGOA is designed to undermine African nations and to turn them into warrens for cheap labor for major U.S. brands. But all that being said, obviously there are millions, tens of thousands of people, almost a million people who have become employed under this, many of whom are fighting to improve their conditions. We were there in the industrial park in Awassa, and when they first opened the park, there were a lot of criticisms because there wasn't good transportation for workers to get to and from the campuses. People were protesting, they were striking. There's now, free buses that take people there. The wages have been raised, the housing has been improved. So, workers are fighting to improve their lives and to make the best out of the situation. And the vast majority of them, by the way, are women. And I think it's a deeply important reality to recognize the impact of these sanctions, because most of these people who are coming and who are working there, it's hard for Americans, I think, sometimes to conceive this. They've never worked in the money economy before. They've never received wages. They've only existed on small, isolated, rural farms where the male head of household controls everything, right? So this is the first opportunity they've had to make their own income, to support themselves. We talked to multiple women who, are single mothers raising kids, and for them the job is a lifeline because it means that they have at least some option to take their own lives into their own hands and to fight for a better future for their own family. But you look at what the U.S. is saying is they're like, oh, we're open to an off-cycle renegotiation of us removing Ethiopia from AGOA. By the way, they also removed Guinea and Mali last year, so says something. But it's predicated on Ethiopia doing certain things, certain unnamed things. And you can sort of guess what they might be, opening up negotiations with the TPLF, offering more amnesty to these TPLF people who committed these war crimes. All these sorts of things are what they're looking to compel. And they're looking to push a sanctions bill because they're also looking to compel the same thing. Like, okay, we can get along again, but only if you start to row back some of these different changes that we don't like, especially the Ethiopia-Eritrea peace deal. And I can say I had a cabinet minister tell us while we were there that when they met with U.S. diplomats, that was specifically raised by the United States as an issue they have with Ethiopia is the peace deal with Eritrea. And I spoke about it before, but I just don't want us to lose that thread because I think it's crucial that the U.S. is essentially against peace and against the historic cultural conversation happening all around the Horn, which I think is really beautiful in so many different ways. And so obviously they're trying to find a way to look better in the media, to seem more fair in the media, to look more even-handed in terms of how they're addressing the issue of atrocities. But at the end of the day, what they really want to do is use that as a smokescreen to preserve their ultimate position, which is to undermine the will of the Ethiopian people who do not want the TPLF there at all. Whatever other differences people have, people do not want them to come back. That is why the war failed in and of itself. And so they're trying to look more even-handed, say, look over here, while over there they're trying to put extra pressure on the Ethiopian government to bring the TPLF back, because the TPLF will say, as they negotiate, we don't want to work with Eritrea, we got to roll that back. They're going to say, we don't want to deal with Farmajo in Somalia because obviously they never wanted him there in the first place, and they did everything possible to undermine the country and the other government. They're going to want to roll back some of the economic changes. And it's not because, as their supporters have incredibly started to say all around the world, that they're like socialist, communist, revolutionaries that are all about the good of the people. I mean, that's a shocking statement. But it's because they want to make sure they can steal all money. The whole reason the TPLF kept everything owned by the state isn't because they're in favor of central planning and state ownership to advance the needs of poor people. The whole reason why they did it is because they control all the deals, so they could funnel them to all these, so-called associations, effort, and others, so that their friends get all the money. That there's no sort of legitimate commercial and economic intercourse in the country. And they would want to go back to that. I mean, they obviously are already on a capital strike. You go to Addis, you look at all these buildings that they stopped building. That didn't just happen because of the war. It started to happen because of that, because they were trying to put pressure on Dr. Abiy. So you can see that the position remains the same in the United States. The rhetoric has changed. They're hoping people, I think, forget about it to some degree so that they can do it. And the ultimate sort of goal of that is to make sure that the No More movement is demobilized, because the No More movement became the force multiplier in the whole continent by exploding what they were doing all around the world and exposing it to millions of people and getting people to stand up and say no more, who had no cultural connection, no ethnic connection to the Horn of Africa, but who felt the justness of the struggle and felt something had to happen. So I'll just close on this. The other factor of that, and I think an important factor, is that in the United States this year is the midterm elections. And of course, there are all sorts of people who are emerging talking about, I love Ethiopia, I love Eritrea, I love Somalia, I can't believe the U.S. was backing TPLF, and we're going to change it. Old and new people trying to get somebody out, and I'm from Virginia. Mark Warner is the senior senator there from Virginia. I can never really remember Mark Warner saying much of anything about Ethiopia. And now, like every other week, he's issuing some statement on social media, like, to my Ethiopian constituents, I want you to know we're following the issues closely. And, you know, the issue with that is, Democrat and Republican, is they want to make it about politics, not about policy. They want to trick people into thinking, well, why protest? Why go out into the streets? If you just put me in there, I'm going to take care of you. And, you know, we all see how false that is on any number of issues. But, like, let's just be real. Clinton supported the TPLF. Bush supported the TPLF. Obama supported the TPLF. Trump basically didn't say much of anything and then said Egypt should bomb the dam. So, you know, basically both major parties at every turn are not in favor of Ethiopia, but all of a sudden they want you to think it. And I think it's critically important for us to be about policy, not about politics. Whatever little letter comes after your name is not the issue. The issue is, where do you stand on the actual content of what's happening in the Horn of Africa. And we can deal with anybody who's willing to oppose imperialism in the Horn of Africa, who wants to roll back sanctions, who wants to help empower the region rather than tear it down. That's good, not bad. And from my point of view, we need every political party, the ones in Congress and the ones out of Congress, to support that. That should be the unified consensus position of anyone who wants to get involved in politics in the United States of America, is that you have to be on the right side of this issue. But that's only going to happen if there's a strong, independent, uncompromising movement that's got all sorts of people in it. People with no political party, Democrats, Republicans, socialists, Christians, Muslims, whatever, however you want to primarily identify, which is, quite frankly, the diversity of No More, one of the most diverse movements I think that has ever come about in this country from an anti-imperialist perspective, is that it's not about those identifiers, it's about the content of the policy. And I think we're going to see more and more opportunists who saw what happened with the governor of Virginia, and they think they can exploit the vote of Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Somali people in this country in order to do what they want to do, which is not what we need them to do. I think it's critically important to remember, as No More, our strength has been our independence and the uncompromising reality that it's about the policies, it's about the substance and the content of what's actually happening in the Horn of Africa, that's not going to change, and nobody can show up, you know, with some false promise of X, Y, and Z and think that they're going to just be able to you know, take the community and supporters of what's happening with No More on a ride electorally. We have to stand up to that. I think it's a critically important factor. And I think it's a key factor also of how they want to demobilize this movement, because No More is a force multiplier. It has the opportunity and already has changed the world and changed the conversation on this issue. It can continue to do so. I think there's a lot more potential and a lot more to come. And I just want to say that I do think that there is a lot of potential and a lot more to come. You know, I know the little Twitter campaign being run by the TPLF, you know, trying to demoralize people. Where is No More? What's going on? That's nonsense. You know, it's right here in this room. It's out in the streets. It's in the people we're talking about. And it's not going anywhere, and it's created connections between people that definitely aren't going anywhere and that no one expected to happen, which is creating a strength that no one expected to see. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm very honored to be here with all of my co-panelists who, you know, spoke so fantastically. I'm looking forward to, you know, the rest of our discussion here, but more importantly, to the rest of our struggle moving forward until we have true independence and sovereignty for the people on the Horn of Africa and all the people of Africa and really all the people of the world. Thank you.
Thank you again, Eugene. So we're going to open up now our final discussion period. If you have any questions or comments for Eugene or the panelists, yes, I see my friend here. Let's get you up here to the mic. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you for everything. I have a question, but before the question is, we have been hearing about the U.S. being against Eritrea. Why? And at this audience, you have a right to know. I think Fish already explained, and then Eugene clearly put it together. The reason why the U.S. is against Eritrea is because its leadership and its culture. Because the Eritrean, it is self-reliance, independent, two things. People say that only in terms of talking, but that's not the case. In Eritrea, immediately after the liberation, that's when they started. They want them to be corrupted like the rest of some African countries. They don't want to. We did not sacrifice for so many people to become one of the other African leaders, some of the African leaders. So what they said was, we are independent, we are self-reliant. If you guys recall 1992-93, Mallas and President Siyaasa Forte, they were saying they are the best African leaders. Then in 1994, everything changed. So for you guys, what I want you, at least from what they said, they put us immediately to fight with the TPLF. They were their mercenaries. To give you an idea, there was a US representative that went to Ethiopia, came to Eritrea. They gave them the green light to fight the war in 1998. That's because they would not listen. They would not go along with the agenda of the US or the Europeans. So, because of that, they did everything to destroy us. The other thing I can tell you also is, in Africa, all the mining, the minerals, the country, they take only 10%, maybe less than 10% share. In Eritrea, there are two. One is the gold mining, potash mining. The gold mining was I think from Canada, the company. They were 50-50. That's unheard. The only country that I know was Chile. Then the potash came. On the potash also, they were 60-40. So the reason they need to destroy Eritrea and its leaders is because they are not listening and they are being bad for good. They are contagious. They are going to teach that the rest of the Africans. So, in case you are wondering why is the US against Eritrea, is basically the Eritreans are saying, leave us alone. There was a question earlier that she asked me, just leave us alone. We need to do what we need to do. And then I think Eugene mentioned the UN, I think what's millennium goal they had. Eritrea did it all under sanction. And you guys know what sanction is now because of Ukraine and the US. That's what they did to us over 20 years. While we were under that, we did everything that what he was talking, whether it's health, education, maternity, or name it. So what I'm saying is, I want you guys to be aware. It's not because we are bad people. It is because we want to have our own destiny to achieve what we need to achieve. Thank you. One question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I know this moment is we discussed earlier. I want you to elaborate on that. We can't solve it from here. The African people in Africa, the continent, they need to be engaged. What do we have to do? Because you have to remember, all the leaders are afraid of the West because they have so billions in there. They don't want them to just be taken. So how do we need to make sure the African people are engaged? Thank you.
A comment here? Do you want to come to the mic? Just so everyone can hear you.
I don't have any question. I just wanted to say thank you so much for co-laboring with us and for presenting the issues in such a nuanced way and just for being so well versed and taking the time to do a lot of things that a lot of journalists nowadays are not doing. And I just wanted to express my personal gratitude and appreciation.
Eugene, something triggered in my mind that I want to share. In 1947, London Times had a picture of my grandpa, and it says, he is a racist. He does not like white people. And my grandpa answered, I'm a pro-Ethiopian. And the reason is because coming back from exile, he made sure that British do not have no control in the Supreme Court. They want us to use their own currency, right? And so on and so on. So he fought for that. So in your discussion earlier, how do we see in the way that at one time the Romans controlled the world, at one time Constantinos controlled this, and now we have China or American or Russia, and we're not even there. So how do you see that we can be self-reliant in doing things that we make decision on our own to do that?
We will take this one here, and then we'll go to the panel.
Once again, I want to thank you guys for coming. I definitely appreciate you guys, including our good friend there as well. Quick question for you. So how do we balance this Chinese and American interest in Ethiopia? Because the way that, at the end of the day, these big powers are going to fight over our land, and the people that will die will be our people. That's what we're trying to fight against. So don't fight on our lands. You guys can do your fighting somewhere else. You know what I mean? But the way that the whole structure has been is that they keep fighting on our lands. The people that die are the ones that look like us, and we don't want that. So how do we balance this in a realistic way? The powers, the China versus America interest. How do we fight that? Or how do we balance that, and how do we go forward with this? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for those questions. A lot to be said there. I mean, I think in terms of engaging with, the rest of Africa, it's crucial to really build and consolidate with the grassroots movements in Africa that are demanding the same thing. I mean, I know, it was mentioned earlier in Mali, for instance, has become a lot more interested in more, given the context of, what's happening there vis-a-vis French colonialism and neo-colonialism, I should say, and the possibility of what that is. I think obviously there's a discourse, growing discourse in many different countries around, what's the next century going to bring to Africa? Is it going to be another century of poverty, being divided, deprivation, or is there going to be some sort of uplift? I mean, in some countries it's further than others, in some countries it's around the edges, but I do think that there are people with similar dreams in every part of the continent. And I think especially among young people, Africa is the youngest continent by a long shot. And I think that every single country, I was in Ghana last year too, this exact statistic is alluding me to 50% of the country is between 15 and 17 or something like that. And so, everyone there is young and thinking about the future and thinking about what it really means. And people are organizing. It doesn't get the same level of play in the West, but I do think that there's a greater grassroots consciousness that's growing amongst young people all across the African continent. Not all in the same way, but I think along the same lines. That the issue of neocolonialism has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed decisively. And that on top of that, without that question being addressed, that nothing else can really be resolved. Because the quote-unquote poverty of Africa is obviously predicated on the existence of neocolonialism. It's a fake poverty. It's also, I think, 60% of the world's resources are coming out of Africa right now. I think, the issue of agricultural productivity is massive and possible. So I think that's really the question, is we have to look at the grassroots level, similar to how No More has already spread in this country and other countries, really not through any kind of top-down thing, but really just through the proliferation of people talking to one another in different places and building and looking for similar organizations. And I think it's a challenge. I think it's one that a lot of people are taking up. I know that there's been, a number of meetings and, some things have been mentioned here locally about the Pan-African space here in the Denver area, and I think we have to take that same mentality to the rest of the continent. We have to reanimate the Pan-African spirit. There's sort of a fake reanimation of that Pan-African spirit going on right now. It's amazing for me to hear these speeches at the UN General Assembly and the AU of these people who've done nothing for their own people talking about Pan-Africanism. But I think that's actually a positive, not a negative, because it shows that even the worst leaders in Africa recognize that their own people will get rid of them if they don't start to do something to at least appear to be trying to be against the current sort of status quo on the continent. And I think that's why you see some tensions even between allies of the United States on the African continent and the United States on certain questions, like why did Senegal abstain in the UN General Assembly vote on Ukraine? Obviously because they have the AU presidency, and it would have been untenable for them to be seen as being, in this war drive that U.S. imperialism was trying to stampede at the Security Council and the General Assembly. So I think that is really the question for us, is how to identify and how to tap, and then how to connect the people who are struggling all over the continent with a similar vision for where we need to go, which I think speaks to the other question, which is the other two questions, which, really how is Africa going to start to be a protagonist and not just someone who is being worked on as a subject? And I think that starts with a recognition of what the real role of Africa is in the global economy right now, which is a primary resource export-oriented continent, which is completely untenable on multiple different levels, and which ultimately heavily limits the ability of, industry, quote unquote, but I think the bigger thing than industry is high technology. And the two things work very closely together, and I think that really the question from my point of view is, it's relatively clear what economic opportunities are on the table from Africa and from China and from Turkey and from India, all of which are playing significantly larger roles, and of course Europe, which continues to play a large role. So the issue is Africa going to be a subject or an object, or is Africa going to be a subject? And I think that is, one of the questions that's been raised here about self-reliance, and I think it's critically important, because the issue becomes, how do you get the skills necessary in order to be able to assert yourself, to be able to insert yourself at a higher level in terms of the so-called value chain? I mean, I think in such a globalized world, I don't think we're in a moment where you can have import substitution for every single thing and every country can be self-reliant. But it just doesn't seem to me that Africa has any future at all if it continues to only be exporting primary resource commodities. And it has to aggressively get to a higher level in high technology. I mean, you look at what's happening now with the decoupling of the United States and China, which is having a big effect on Africa. It's partially why the industrial parks are succeeding to the degree they are in Ethiopia, because people don't want to be sanctioned dealing with China, so they're moving more of their sort of low-level assembly to Africa, because there's a lot of young people who live in poverty who they can pay to work for very little. And you see some leaders, Cyril Ramaphosa, for instance, in South Africa, like he was, trumpeting this. He was like, Toyota came and they're putting some more stuff together. This company came and they're putting more stuff together. But the only cell phone company making smartphones in South Africa just closed 3 weeks ago, even though it had gotten like 100 million rand of government support. So they're super happy that they're bringing in all of these, foreign companies for low-level, semi-skilled production, where most of the value is going to Japan, to the United States, and not to South Africa. But there's no conversation in the country about making your own smartphones. And it's not just about that, but it's about a range of different things. If you have the most coltan, which is in the smartphone, why aren't you making the batteries? If the critical technologies that exist vis-a-vis, electric car vanadium, which is, so to make a huge battery, right? Like if you have solar, you have wind power, as conservative people often say, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, where do you get power? You have to have a huge battery. But not a lot of materials and metals that can hold all of that energy for long periods of time. The main metal is vanadium. Most of the vanadium is in South Africa. So shouldn't South Africa make all the huge batteries? But there's some other company from, I think, Germany or somewhere that's building this giant battery factory in Coventry in England, which, I'm glad they're building a giant battery factory to have more wind power. But you have to ask yourself, where's Africa in that conversation? And I think that is the easiest way that I actually don't think it's that challenging for Africa to actually benefit from the opportunities of other nations that are looking to do their own commerce, but only if it has the mentality that it wants to be a subject and not an object. that it doesn't want to just have things taken from it, but it also wants to create things, and it also wants to educate people at a high level, which is the other sort of critical issue. I mean, illiteracy is still a massive issue. So many different challenges that exist. The cultural production, which is, unbelievable when you go to many of these countries, and the whole culture is American. Which is one thing I'll say I did appreciate about Ethiopia. You got to kind of search on the radio to find American music. And it's, it seems small, but you go to a lot of places in Africa and it's just all American music all the time, and I think that is, countries, very rich cultures. And so I think, even things like that seem small, but that build an inferiority complex in people and make them feel that they don't have a place in the world and that they can't stand up and they can't act. But there's a reason why the only cold storage facility that's significant for vaccines for COVID-19 in Africa is in Ethiopia, and it was built by China. Because they understood the relationship there and the role Ethiopian Airlines could play as an air bridge for vaccines. And they took advantage of the opportunity, and they skilled up their own people, and they skilled up their own country to be able to do something that could help the whole continent in a massive way that nobody else was doing. And I think that's, a small example. I'll give another example, and then I'll just shut up here. But, I had the opportunity to visit a training academy in Massawa in Eritrea, where every teacher, by the way, is like advanced electrical engineers, and people of very high degrees, but they're all like 23. So like young geniuses out here teaching their own people. And the way they bring in the students is, so the concept basically is that they bring the theoretical knowledge. They bring in the students are people who are like working in Massawa in different companies. And the companies have different challenges. So the people come to the school to, sort of take their practical knowledge to a higher level by gaining the theoretical knowledge behind all of these different things, and then being able to operate more advanced systems and to be able to go back and to solve the problems of their companies. And it's, everything from going to, people writing down all the records, to being in computers, to having people who understand HVAC, who, if you bring in something then from Germany to have air conditioning, if it breaks, you don't have to hire some German to come in and fix it. You have people right there in Asmara who can fix it, and you also have workshops that exist that can make the parts in and of themselves. And so you can see in a way, it's what the IMF and other people say don't do, because it's sort of a slow, laborious process in many ways, but you're building up the basis of skills in the economy by which then you can make big leaps in terms of where you are. Because obviously they're heavily sanctioned. But you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, you look at what Eritrea is doing right now, they will probably benefit from trade with China, if you want my view, more than almost any other country in Africa. Because they are going to be able to operate at a much higher level in terms of the skill base, in terms of the type of deals that they can make. When you look at some of these other countries, that all they can offer China is cheap labor. But it's very different from a logistical, I won't get into the whole thing, but I will say that it's easier to get from Khartoum to Massawa than it is from Khartoum to Port Sudan. So the ability to have advanced logistics, high technology, IT-related things, the ability to make that jump when you have the opportunity and the aspect and the investment to do it, I think is very much there. And I think you don't see that really many places, but it's talked about more, Rwanda, which is not a country I think we should, model ourselves after that much, but they're talking more about it. You can see people are sort of copying Eritrea, but the idea of really having a very strong skills-based presentation to how you develop your economy and how you develop your young people, I think is going to be huge for Africa in the 21st century, because you can't take advantage of the technologies if you don't have the opportunity, if you don't have the people on the ground that not only can operate the things, but can fix them. Like, that is something that is heavily underrated in developing nations, is it's not that hard to get machines, but it's difficult to get the parts and to fix them yourself. And so you buy the machines from Turkey, from wherever, and they're like, yeah, great, we'll take your money, and then when it breaks, they send someone from Istanbul to come fix it, and they also fly the parts there, right? And so that means that a lot of times if you can't afford all that, the thing breaks, and it's no longer necessary. So having a broader skills base, I think, is going to be huge. You can see that also, too, in Ethiopia with ICT. Alibaba is building this giant industrial IT park just outside of Addis Ababa. You talk to young people who are working in programming and things like that, they're very excited about their possibility to use that to skill up. But I think it's really a desire and a mentality to no longer be an object, but to be a subject, which means that you're going to probably lose something. Like, if South Africa starts to say, we're going to start building all the batteries instead of these other companies, they're going to try to destroy the country. So, I mean, the reality is you have to also be willing to sacrifice to change your position in the world value chain, which is, quite frankly, how China got where they are today. China used to be one of the weakest, most divided countries by all the colonial and imperial powers, and then they got together, they formed a strong country, they were willing to fight a liberation struggle to do it, and they were like, we're just going to do what we're going to do, and you can't stop us, and look at where they are now. So it starts with the mentality, but I think also it really starts with an understanding of the fact that we need to really not just be exporting things, we need to be building out the skills of our human resources in Africa to make it possible to take advantage of everything that's out there in the 21st century. It should be a win-win for Africa to have every country competing to be in Africa. It should be a win-win. It shouldn't be a negative thing. It does not have to be a new scramble for Africa as it's often being presented. And I don't even think it's at that level. But it can become that if there isn't a mentality of what the future should look like.
Thank you. I want to encourage folks to stick around and keep the conversation going, but this does bring us to the end of our program. Let's give another round of applause to our amazing. Before we close out, I would like to invite up Jen, who is an organizer with the Anti-Coalition, to say a few words.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen. I'm an organizer with Answer, and I'm an organizer of today's event. And we want to say thank you so much for coming out, and a big thank you to all of our speakers. And a special thank you to Eugene for coming all the way out for NYC for this event. And a big thank you to B3 United Methodist Church for hosting us in this space today. Also, a big thank you to our co-sponsors, Solidarity Movement for a New Ethiopia, Ethiopian American Development Council, and United States of Africa. We at Answer are so glad to be building with the Ethiopian, Eritrean, and the broader African diaspora communities here in Denver and Aurora. And we look forward to continue to build Pan-African unity and anti-imperialist resistance in Colorado. We highly encourage everyone to follow Breakthrough News for great coverage on issues concerning the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa, the U.S., and around the world. You can find them on all social media channels at BT Newsroom. If you want to get more info about all of this, you can talk to any of us with Answer. You can find us in the room. Come talk to me. We want to say thank you for coming out, and we hope to see y'all again. Thank
I said it's good to be out and kind of getting a lot of things
Oh yeah.